Hello, welcome back to the channel. If you've seen a few of my previous videos, you might know that I'm a big Taylor Swift fan and also a huge book nerd. So naturally, I've got the album Midnights, and while it's not my favorite Taylor Swift album, I really do like a lot of the songs from it. And there's this thing that I do sometimes where instead of connecting a song to my own life and personal experiences, I connect it more with stories and fictional characters. I've made previous videos about Taylor Swift songs that remind me of Jane Austen couples and Shakespeare couples, and today I'm going to be talking about songs on the album Midnights that remind me of fictional characters or stories. So I'm going to start off with Jo March from Little Women and the song Midnight Rain. I know I'm not the only person who's spotted a parallel between these, but I think there definitely is one, so let's talk about it. In the novel Little Women and its various movie adaptations, Jo is by far the most rebellious of the sisters, and she's the one who's the least interested in marriage or romance. There's this thing with her and their neighbor Lori where it's clear that they probably have feelings for each other, but she's not ever really able to deal with or express those feelings, and when he confronts her with them and asks her to marry him, she rejects him. As a kid reading Little Women, I found that to be very disappointing. I felt like, really, they were perfect for each other, and why couldn't they get together? But as an adult, I very much take Jo's side on it. She wasn't ready for marriage, she had other things that she wanted to do with her life before settling down, and even if they were close friends and maybe had some romantic feelings between them, it wasn't the right relationship for her. The song Midnight Rain is all about that. Nothing in the song indicates that the person was a bad person. In fact, it says, I broke his heart because he was nice. It's just that it wasn't the right person or the right time. And their desires and goals for what they wanted out of life were not compatible. Because he was sunshine, I was midnight rain. He wanted it comfortable, I wanted that pain. He wanted a bride, I was making my own name. Now, then it goes on to some stuff that's not really quite as descriptive of that character and relationship. Chasing that fame. Jo wasn't really chasing fame exactly so much as independence. But overall, the song just reminds me of her so much. The next song I want to talk about is You're on Your Own, Kid, which actually reminds me a lot of The Great Gatsby. Now, the genders are swapped. The singer is obviously a woman, Taylor Swift, and since the album is very autobiographical, one would assume that the narrator is as well. And with lines like, I picked the petals, he loves me not, it's clear that she's singing about a guy. But there are parts of it that seem so much like Gatsby's perspective on the story of The Great Gatsby that it's just like, I don't think it's intentional at all. I don't think that any of this is intentional. The songs are supposed to be about like real midnights throughout her life. I just happen to notice, when it reminds me of a fictional story, and this one very much does. It's about unrequited love, reinventing oneself, and the fact that you've reinvented yourself not being enough, references to hosting parties trying to get someone's attention. And there's even a reference to the name Daisy in it with the lyrics, I see the great escape, so long Daisy May, I picked the petals, he loves me not. Obviously there are some things that don't fit, like the references to sprinklers and fireplaces and friendship bracelets, and the ending is significantly more optimistic. Even though it doesn't end with the couple getting together, it does seem to be like something has been taken away from this, something has been learned, whereas the ending to The Great Gatsby is very much tragedy. But the verse that really led me to make the connection was, I gave my blood, sweat, and tears for this. I hosted parties and starved my body like I'd be saved by a perfect kiss. Tell me that's not just, in a nutshell, what Gatsby's mindset was. Anyway, moving on. High Infidelity makes me think of Guinevere, Arthur, and Lancelot from the King Arthur legends. First of all, just the title, High Infidelity, makes me think high stakes, and it also makes me think high treason. Because Guinevere cheating on King Arthur with Lancelot wasn't just adultery, it was treason. And so that's one of the things that kind of made me be thinking along those lines. But then there are other aspects of it as well that just remind me a lot of the story. Usually Guinevere is portrayed as being married to King Arthur and seeing their relationship, their marriage, as something of a duty that needs to be fulfilled, whereas her romance with Lancelot is often portrayed as genuine love. even though it's, either courtly love never to be fulfilled or adultery or whatever, it's often portrayed in a much more romantic sense than her marriage is. So, with that in mind, lines like, "There's many ways that you can kill the one you love. The slowest way is never loving them enough. Do you really want to know where I was April 29th? Do I really have to chart the constellations in his eyes?" That feeling of infidelity on the grounds of emotional neglect and genuine feelings for the other person, that really makes me think of Queen Guinevere and Sir Lancelot. And then also just the very high stakes imagery. It's not just a relationship gone wrong, it's high infidelity, put on your headphones and burn my city, your picket fences sharp as knives, which, I mean, it ends up starting a war, so that's not inaccurate as far as the Guinevere and Lancelot relationship. Now, of course, that's actually probably meant as metaphor. I doubt that anybody's really burning down a city in the events described in the song. And it's all obviously in the modern day as well. There are references to modern technology and whatnot. But I just think the emotional core of the song very much makes me think of Guinevere and Lancelot. The next one is probably the most distant and kind of tenuous connection, in that I'm not thinking of it describing actual characters or events from a fictional story, but more just the overall feeling of the story, if that makes sense. This may sound odd, but the song Maroon reminds me of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Okay, so hear me out on this. The Sherlock Holmes stories, unless you're talking about the TV show Elementary, don't take place in New York. And they're not primarily about romantic relationships, which the song clearly is. But there are a few things in the song that just make me think of that. First of all, the references to "so scarlet it was maroon" make me think of A Study in Scarlet. The line about "the rubies that I gave up" makes me think of Mary Morstan, John Watson's wife, who was a wealthy heiress but ended up losing her fortune by the end of the first story that she features in, which leaves her free to marry John Watson without any worry about status or social class. And the frequent references to loss and grief actually line up really well also with the stories where Watson ends up losing his wife, who passes away very young, and losing his close friend Sherlock Holmes, who, after his encounter with Professor Moriarty, he believes, and everybody believes, to be dead. So I wake with your memory over me. That's actually really fitting. And then the other thing is that it actually reminds me a lot of Holmes's deductions in the way that it uses tiny snapshots of imagery and detail in order to create a bigger picture, as opposed to just spelling out what happened in the song. The burgundy on my t-shirt when you splashed your wine into me and how the blood rushed into my cheeks, so scarlet it was maroon, the mark you saw on my collarbone, the rust that grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home, so scarlet it was maroon. None of that tells you what happened, but you can piece it together, but to piece it together you have to make deductions. So it almost feels like solving a mystery listening to that song. Next up is The Great War, which reminds me of Harry Potter. Now, this one requires, much like high infidelity, taking what's probably meant as metaphor very literally. Because the idea of "my hand was the one you reached for" all throughout the Great War, well, the Harry Potter books involve two literal wars, one in the present day and one in the backstory, and so people reaching for the people that they love in the middle of a period of intense conflict, that's not a metaphor if you apply it to that. The part towards the end that talks about surviving, grieving, moving on, "there's no morning glory, it was war, it wasn't fair," "I vowed I would always be yours because we survived the Great War," those remind me of like the very end of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and what I imagine must have happened in between that and the epilogue. A time of rebuilding and finally being able to live in peace and being closer than ever to the people that they survived with. However, a lot of the earlier part of the song actually reminds me of the backstory. The Order of the Phoenix, the Marauders, the First War against Voldemort, and so on. It turned into something bigger somewhere in the haze, got a sense I'd been betrayed. That makes me think of Lily and James being betrayed by Peter Pettigrew. And maybe it's the past that's talking, screaming at me from a crypt, telling me to punish you for things you never did. Who gets punished for things he never did? Serious. And then just the repeating line, "my hand was the one you reached for" all throughout the Great War. One of the biggest and most important themes in the Harry Potter series is the power of love and friendship to overcome great obstacles. There are so many different directions that you could take that as far as what specific characters to apply it to, but regardless, it fits very well. And then finally, this isn't a specific book or character, but the song Anti-Hero makes me think of Shakespeare's tragedies, and especially the protagonists, the tragic heroes of Shakespeare's tragedies. The idea of someone who's their own worst enemy, who has deeply rooted flaws that lead to their own downfall and create their own problems, or at least make the problems that they have worse because they don't deal with them well. I should not be left to my own devices. They come with prices and vices. I end up in crisis, tale as old as time. Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Troilus and Cressida, Othello. It's me. Hi. I'm the problem, it's me. I mean, that just kind of sums up Shakespeare's tragic heroes. Now, don't get me wrong, there's usually a villain in the play as well. There's Iago and Claudius and King Lear's two eldest daughters and so on and so forth. But the protagonist always has a deep personal flaw, and the situation that they end up facing is one that brings that out and causes them to... The flaw in combination with the situation causes them more problems than if it had been a different person confronted with that situation. Lines that remind me of specific characters from Shakespeare's tragedies, and this is why I didn't pick a specific one but just made it Shakespeare's tragic heroes in general, because there are actually a lot of different lines that remind me of different characters. So I have this thing where I get older but just never wiser. King Lear. King Lear, you have gotten older, but you have not gotten wiser. When my depression works the graveyard shift, all of the people I've ghosted stand there in the room. Hamlet. Okay, so there's the reference to ghosts, and of course that's ghosting as in the modern phenomenon of you want to end a relationship so you just stop contacting the person. But there's literal ghosts in Hamlet. And graveyard shift obviously means like overnight, but there's literal graveyards in Hamlet too. And the idea of wrestling with depression and that causing you conflict and serious problems, that's a big part of Hamlet. One day I'll watch as you're leaving and life will lose all its meaning for the last time. Troilus and Cressida. Did you hear my covert narcissism I might disguise as altruism like some kind of congressman? Julius Caesar. It's all about politics and people dressing up their rather narcissistic actions as altruistic and benevolent, from Julius Caesar himself, who is like, well, you know, I'll refuse the crown a couple of times before I'll take it, and I'm only doing this for the good of Rome, to the conspirators who are like, you know, we're conspiring to murder Caesar because it's for the greater good. They're all so full of themselves, and they're all wrong, and they all dress it up as, like, this selfless benevolence. And then finally, I have this dream my daughter-in-law kills me for the money. She thinks I left them in the will. King Lear ends up being not outright killed, but definitely mistreated and put in a situation that ultimately leads to his death by his two eldest daughters, who want his power. Macbeth, where Lady Macbeth convinces her husband to murder the king because of the prophecy that he will be king. Richard III, where Richard definitely murders his way to the throne, and Hamlet, where King Claudius murdered his brother in order to take his throne and marry his wife. So the idea of being backstabbed by family members for selfish reasons, yeah, that's totally a thing in Shakespeare's tragedies. It must be exhausting always rooting for the anti-hero. Yeah, that's kind of what reading Shakespeare's tragedies is like. It is exhausting. So anyway, like I said, I don't think that any of these parallels are intentional, and I know that some of them are a little bit more of a stretch than others. But these are the books that I thought of when I was listening to these songs, and I just wanted to share that with y'all. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more from me, be sure to subscribe. I post new videos twice a week on Monday and Thursday.